Greetings, learners. Welcome to another session. In this session, we'll be looking at a trigonometric question, right? So, if we can check, we have 2.4 here. They say consider the following expression or consider the expression. We're given expression here. You can see your numerator is what is cos 2x multiplied by tan x divided by sine square x, right? So the question here, they say determine what the values of x, right? We're given the interval for x here, and then for which the expression will be undefined. So want to determine the values for x for which this expression here will be undefined, right? So if we can check, how can we make an expression to be undefined, or how can an expression be undefined? Okay, let's say we have an expression of I can select any expression or choose an expression. Let's say we have 1 divided by 0. 1 divided by 0 is what? It's undefined. You can confirm with your calculator. What about 10 divided by 0? It's also undefined, right? 100 divided by 0 undefined. So what does this mean? It means that any number, right, divided by 0 is what? It's always undefined. So how can we make this expression to be undefined, right? We need to check our denominator. Our denominator has to what? Has to equal to what? It has to equal to 0. So if I can write it here, our sine square x or sine x squared has to equal to what? 0, right? How can, okay, what will be the x values if sine squared x or sine square x equal to 0, right? There are so many ways you can find your values for x, right? So here you just need to determine, you don't need to solve, you need to determine the values. So it's probably three values that you need to determine because you have 3 marks. You don't need to solve in this case. So please don't waste time trying to solve this, right? So, okay, you have your calculator like this, right? So for you to determine those values, right, you need to go to mode first, right? In most calculators, you'll have only three options when you press your mode, right? So for my case, I have 8 options. So if you have three options, you'll have comp number one, you'll have what's the other one? Stat number two, you'll have table number three, right? For my case, I have what? I have 7 as my table, so I'll select 7. So if you have 3 as your table, select 3. So for my case, I have 7, so I'll select 7. There we go. So you should have f of x here, right? So you need to type this function here. So this will be what? Sine, right? Remember, we're squaring this sine. Let's put another bracket. How do we insert x? We need to insert x, press alpha, right? Alpha, you can see it's red here. We can able to select x, which is red here. Put this bracket here, x will appear. And then we close this bracket. The first bracket, we close it. We want to square the x, right? Remember, we're squaring this x, and then we close the bracket again to match the other one. And then from here we press the equal sign. Okay, it asks us where to start. So if we can check here, the interval starts at where? 0. So we start at 0. Okay, where do we end? We end at what? 180, because you can see the interval ends at what? At 180. Okay. Okay, what do you want to step with? Okay, here you can step with 90 degrees. If the period was uh 180 degrees, you'll have to step with 45 because the period will be smaller, right? So if you can check this sine square x or sine x squared is what the period is still 360, so we can step by 90 degrees, right? We step by 90 degrees, but if the period was smaller, was 180, you'll step by 45. Okay. And then you press equal sign. You can see your values for x for which this function will equal to 0, right? So the first value of x is what? Is 0. The second value for x is what? Is 90. The third value of x is what? Is 180, for which this function will be equal to 0. Remember, if this function is equal to 0, it means that this numerator here will divide by 0. And remember, any number divided by 0 is what? It's undefined, right? So we need to write our x values for which this expression will be undefined. So these are the x values. X equals to 0, x is equals to what? 90, x equals to what? 180. So it's very important to note that down. So we have three values for x, where x equals to what? 0, where x equals to what? 90. Okay. And then when x equals to what? 180. Okay, so we are done here. We've determined the values for x, right? So the next one, question 3. Okay, question 3, we can see here. Okay, I'll just write Q3 here. We are given what? We are given f of x, right? Which equals to what? P cos x plus q, and then g of x, which equals to k sine x, right? They are sketched below, right? Okay, 3.1, write down the values for p, q, and k. These values p, q, and what? And k, okay? So if we can check, p falls on what? The first one, f of x, right? So we can see it's the cost graph. Remember, you need to know what the cost graph looks like before you attempt this question, right? So if you don't know the general graph for a cost, it always, right, here at the y-axis here, it always cuts at 1, the general. It always cuts here at 1. So cos x, it always cuts here at 1, right? This is the general one. And then for sine, right, because we also have sine, you need to know the general, how the general sine graph looks like, right? So the general sine graph, okay, let me just put it in blue here so that you can see. Remember, it starts at 0 and ends like this, right? So what I want you to note about the sine, it cuts here at the origin. The cos, it cuts here at 1 for where x is equals to 0. It cuts here at 1. Where x is equals to 0 here at sine, y is equals to 0. So this is the general formula for sine, and the general graph of sine, and the general graph of cos of x, right? So in order for you to solve this, you need to know how the general graph looks like, so that you can compare if this one is shifted or reflected. You can know, okay, this is our sine, this is our cos, right? Okay, so if we can check this one, we can see here it cuts at 1, right, and goes down, and its minimum value is 3 here, right? So we can have an idea this one has to be what? It has to be cos, because we can see it's also shifted down, right? 1 unit down. You can see from here, it's 1 here, and then here is what? Is negative -3. So it was supposed to be 2 and 2 here. So we can see it's also shifted down, and we can see the amplitude here. How do we see the amplitude? Is from this point here, this point here, and this point here, right? These 2 points, we can find the amplitude, the maximum here, and the middle of this graph here, right? Not the maximum and the minimum, right? Okay, if you want to use the maximum and the minimum, you need to also divide by what? Divide by 2. So what you can say either, if you want to use half of these to find the amplitude, you can say 1 minus 1. 1 is the top one or the maximum one, minus this one, which is -1. So you'll have what? 1 plus 1, which is what? Which is 2. Or you can take the maximum value here and the minimum value, you minus it, and then you divide by 2, right? So you can take the maximum value, which is 1 here, 1, minus the minimum value of this graph here, which is what? -3. -3. And then you divide by what? You divide by 2, right? So you'll get what? You'll get 4 divided by 2, which is what? Which is 2. So it's the same. So whichever method you use, um, uh, yeah, it's fine as long as you get to the same solution, right? So we can see the p-value right here is what? Is 2. So if we use the maximum and the minimum method, this one, for p will equal to the maximum, which is 1, minus the minimum, which is -3, divided by 2, right? What is this? It's 4 divided by 2, which is what? Which is 2, right? And then we go for q. So q, we check if this graph was shifted down or shifted up, right? We can see that here we have 1, here we have -3. So it means it has been shifted down. Like how many units? So we can see from here, it was supposed to be here at 2 and -2. So it has been shifted down 1 unit. So Q has to be what? -1, right? Q will be -1. And what about K? Let's check K. K is on the sine graph. We can see the sine graph, right? Look at the original sine graph. So it's like this one. Here it goes down, like you can see the minimum here. So what does this tell us? It tells us it has been reflected on what? On this x-axis, right? It has been reflected on this x-axis. So we can say that k has to be what? -1. This one, it will be -1. It won't be +1. If it was +1, it would have been like this, right? Now it's negative, it's like this, right? So you got all your values for K, Q, and P. Okay, okay, let's move forward. Okay, 3.2. 3.2, they ask us to determine the values for x, for which x is the element of uh, 0 is to 360. You can see 0 is to 360, right? So we need to check where these two graphs are equal. So we can see here they are equal here, they share coordinates here, and also here they are equal here, right? So if they ask us to solve, right, 3.2.1 for f of x equals to what? G of x. If they ask us to solve, it means we'll have to equate this equation here to this equation here. But in this case, they didn't ask us to solve. We just need to determine the values. And for you to solve this, it will be something like 8 marks. So just to give you a clue and not to waste your time, right? If they tell you to determine, you just need to look here, the points here, and then give the x values, right? So we can see the first x value has to be what? Has to be 90 degrees, right? We can see here at 90 degrees, these are equal, right? Here at 90 degrees, where x is equal to 90 degrees here, the two graphs are equal, right? And then the next one is this point here. What is this point here? So this point here is 270 plus 45, right? It's 270 plus 45. So the next x value is 270 plus what? 45. Okay. And then we have what? Our 315 degrees. Okay. So you don't need to solve equating this and f and g and solving. You just need to determine from your graph, right? That's why it's only 2 marks. So please don't waste your time. Okay, the next one, they want you to also determine, okay, where where is g of x? We need to label our graphs now. Let's label our graphs. Okay, g of x will be the blue one, which is the sign. Okay, so this will be g of x. Okay, and then f of x will be the red one, which is cos, right? Okay. Um. Okay, and then now we need to determine where g of x is greater than what? F of x. So we look at these graphs, right? You can see here f of x here is greater than what? G of x here. You can see it's on top, which means it's greater than what? G of x. But from here, from 90, right, to what? To here, 315 here, right? We can see that g of x is greater than what? Than f of x. We can see this f of x, the g of x is greater than this f of x here, because f of x is down here, g of x is up here, right? Okay, so we need to determine the values for x. So we can see it's between what? 90 and what? And 315. Let me write 315 here. Okay. So the big question, will 90 and 315 be included in this interval for which g of x is greater than f of x? No, it won't be included, because if it's included here, we can see that g of x is equals to what? F of x. Here also, g of x equals to what? F of x. So it won't be included. We want where g of x is greater than what? Is greater than f of x, right? So where is the interval? The interval is between 90 degrees, which is greater than x less than what? 315 degrees, right? So we can see that 90 is not included and also 315 is not included. So it's this part here, right? Because where 315 and 90, they are both equal. So what where g of x what is greater than f of x. Okay, so this is the final answer. So it's your 2 marks here. So you don't need to solve, you just need to determine. Please don't waste your time. Okay, all the best. Thank you.